spent the last few months slowly crawling my way through Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and I can finally talk about some of the things that I both love and hate about it. At first I thought I might have been crazy, since it seems like everyone has been madly in love with it from the very moment it was released. And don't get me wrong, it is a really fun game, and I totally think that it's worth the $70 I paid for it. But as good as it was, through half of the game I kept having these moments where stuff just didn't feel as great as everyone made it seem. So today, let's talk about some of those parts that I wanted more of and also wanted less of. I sectioned this up into 5 main points, and they're not all just straight up bad or good. Some things in Rebirth may have been an annoyance at points, but I still see why they chose to do things that way, even if it's just not the way that I would want it. But as always, let me know your thoughts in the comments, because I'm sure that you may agree and disagree with some of the things I have to say here. First, I gotta admit that this game was kicking my ass for the first few hours. It felt like the enemies were more complicated to deal with, and I just kept dying way too fast without enough chances to heal me and my team. But slowly I started to get more familiar with things, and I gotta say that it's tougher than Remake, but much more fun and rewarding when you get the hang of it. First off, we have the synergy system, and I'll admit that this is where I was lost at first. Your party has multiple actions they can pull off together using plenty of different synergy skills. I wasn't using those as much as I should have in the first few chapters, and that was a huge L on my part. But it's cool to have these skills you can pull off and swap out with different team members. They all have different effects, and the best part is that they don't use any resources like MP or your ATB gauge. They're actually the best options to use as much as you can, because it's the best way to fill that ATB gauge faster than any other regular attack. And I won't lie, I had some moments where I just straight up spammed Cloud and Barret's synergy skill, because that shit was putting in work. And then there's the synergy abilities that can either deal damage or activate special effects. I don't know how I made it through some sections without paying any mind to the synergy, but I definitely made the game harder for myself by not taking advantage of it. Plus, it also ties into the bonds that the characters have together, which is an entirely different thing. It's just cool to think that there was so much depth put into the synergy system, and that it becomes a massive game changer as you make your way through the story. So the menus, commands, and choices you can swap around for every character gets to be a little daunting and confusing. This is coming from someone who enjoys having those auto-equip features for gear and items. Because hey, sometimes you just don't want to put that much extra strategy into building your characters. Sometimes you just want to make the characters hit harder and take less damage. And don't get me wrong, I do love how much variety there is and how much you can build up the right skills, materia, weapons, and all of the accessories to go with each character. But I had times where I felt like it was more of a chore switching and swapping through menus just to get things in order. And that goes for both outside and inside of battle. So we always have these 4 command slots where we can put abilities, items, and spells. And it's nice that there's a difference between what you can set for activating both in air and on the ground. At least for some characters. But what sucks is that those slots sometimes don't feel like enough. And trust me, that especially goes for certain characters like Aerith, who has a lot of stuff that she has to set up for fights. For every element, ability, and skill I want to access at the most random times, I could never feel like everything was easy to flow through. Now let's take Cloud for example and say that I want him to have Braver, Counter Strike, Focus Thrust, and maybe Triple Slash. Well, now it means that a lot of other things in his kit aren't going to be on that quick access panel. So now every time I encounter an enemy that's weak to something that isn't on my quick access, I have to open the command menu and file through it every time I need to use that certain move. It's not the biggest pain in the ass, I know, but I saw someone making comparisons to how the skills are handled in Final Fantasy 16, and it got me really thinking. So in 16, you can set up to 12 skills at the same time, but they're just tied to different pages on the skill panel. It's not a perfect answer to things, of course, but it helps to have an easier way to access things without breaking the flow of combat. I had so many battles where it felt like I was navigating menus more than actually fighting, and to be honest, it's not the most fun thing. So maybe that could solve some of that annoyance for me, but I also see that being worse, needing to push too many buttons while you're getting your ass kicked. Because some fights made me relieved to have the option of slowing down combat and giving myself a few extra seconds to think. And later into the story, there's a lot of crazy stuff you have access to that makes you feel more like a strategic genius rather than a dude mashing buttons. It's something that I'm a little conflicted on, but I think it would be cool to see what this game would look like with that kind of system from 16. When I got to the grasslands, I thought to myself, hey, let me just leave all this side stuff for later because why would I need to do it? It wasn't until I got to Junon that it hit me and I realized that some of that extra exploration was really helpful. The materials you collect and the items you can unlock really do give you that extra boost later on. It's not always fun, but traveling around and exploring these places felt like less of a chore, especially when you focus on the tasks you like best. For me, it was analyzing these shrines so I can make the battles against the summons just a little bit easier. I even love the proto-relic missions in each region since they all have an interesting little story behind them, and every region has its own way to complete the tasks. Screwing around with the bandits in the grasslands was a fun time, but then you also have things like Fort Condor, and that might turn you off like it did for me. But what I love is that there's so much variety of what you can do here. It's not just some open world game filled with nothing but mindless crap to do. It adds that extra sense of charm into places where you might want to explore, get some high scores, and most importantly, stay within this experience for a much longer time. And I won't act like I want to get 100% completion on everything here, but the fact that there's so much to do is a huge reason why I didn't get this video out anytime sooner. But I gotta say that I hated Chadley hitting my line every other quest just to say some bullshit. But it was nice having those moments where him and Mai would interrupt each other. Some people may even say that these two get way more hate than they deserve, but the one thing that sucks the most about them is thanks to Sony. Like, it's fine that Rebirth is a PS5 exclusive and all, but giving the devs the ability to have these androids talk to me through my controller was just too much. Rebirth is the kind of game that feels like one big amusement park, and when you choose to only follow the story, that's like choosing to only ride the roller coasters. And hey, it is fun to do that, but you're not getting your money's worth if that's all you do. You want to go to the water park, watch a performance, and try out some of the themed restaurants while you're there too. And that same thing could be said about everything that Rebirth has to offer. The world is filled with a massive variety of quests that can be both annoying but also really helpful. For every Moogle chase section that you might drag yourself through, there's even more like unlocking tough fights against rare monsters in each region. Not all of it is going to be your favorite, but it adds up to a more well-rounded experience you can mess around with. But that also leads to my next point, which kinda conflicts with some of the stuff I just said. So I'm all in favor of the side content being here because it breaks the monotony of gameplay between fights and missions. My only real problem is that sometimes it feels like too much of a turn away from the main focus of the plot. It was fun having Costa del Sol be like the beach episode of an anime and breaking the tension between all the chaos. Because stuff like that shows that the devs want to have more fun with this rather than make it a total copy of the original game. But having stuff like finding cactuars and returning segways be critical to continuing the main story just feels a little bit tedious and out of place. And again, stuff like that can be fun and it can be cool. But I think it's more fun as a side quest rather than something that you need to do before you can move on. Like, we're trying to stop Sephiroth from destroying the world, but first, let's go to the Gold Saucer and try every attraction that they have. Oh wait, you don't want to do that? Well, I guess you don't want to make it to the end of the game then, huh? And yeah, there's moments that do make more sense, like the small minecart section in Mount Corel. It's a fun little part in between the action, but it doesn't fully take you away from what you're already doing. Unlike the part where you recruit members of Shinra just to be part of a parade for God knows why. There's so many times I felt confused why there's walls of minigames that will be in the way of continuing the main story. And you especially see that when you get to the Gold Saucer. I won't lie, some of those sections are fun, but it's lame that you need to do this just to finish the game. The level of detail put into the side content is crazy, and I really appreciate that there's so much extra here. But I've been seeing nothing but a divide over this ever since the game dropped. Some people beat the game twice and they're happy to get the highest scores in every minigame possible. And then there's others that say they want to drop Rebirth just because it feels like it's playing with their time. And again, I don't even blame them for feeling that way. You do eventually get past a lot of that stuff, and it's not so bad in hindsight. Like, after playing through some of the last few chapters of the game, I had some times where I wish I could get that break between the crazy shit that was going on. It helped me to appreciate all the moments where you get a chance to just hang out with the team and get to know everybody better. And the overall character building in Rebirth by itself was amazing, which is why some of those parts don't end up being nearly as bad now that I'm looking back. But then again, I did have a few 2-hour play sessions where I was only doing these mandatory mini games when all I wanted to do was fight and get to the next area. But I can see this being worse for the people who want to collect certain materia or accessories that are locked behind some of these mini games. Hey, for those people who want the max completion and all the trophies in Johnny's Resort, more power to you. Hell, for the people out there who might hate Queen's Blood, I can only imagine how you felt when they made you play it over and over again before you can even get off the cruise ship. It's one of those things that can be fun for most, but a pain in the ass to people who just want it to be straightforward. But hey, I can't lie, I do love me some Queen's Blood. I know people love when these card games are mixed into a totally different game, like with Gwent in the Witcher games. Normally, I just can't vibe with it because I'm not really here for the card collecting and knockoff Magic the Gathering stuff. But there's something that's so fun about Queen's Blood that it had me coming back for more every single time. I've seen some crazy ass deck builds that had me thinking about where I gotta go just to get the right cards. And hey, I'm not even playing it to get trophies, completion bonuses, or anything, it's just a nice fun way to break the pacing of the story. And unlike most of the other mini games, this one stays pretty consistent through the entire game. The cards you collect and the decks that you build stay with you from the very first time you get them all the way until those credits roll. It feels much more solid than jumping back and forth between whatever other things they have set up for you. And I would seriously love to see an update where they add more cards and even put in a battle mode to play against other players online. The only problem is that you won't be able to restart your match 100 times to get your wins, but hey, it's something that they could have some legit tournaments for. It's easy to get into, it's strategic, and there's a ton of depth for potential decks. Maybe we can expect that in a DLC that drops sometime later this year, but until then, I'm enjoying every bit of it here. Regardless of what you like or dislike about Rebirth, it's obvious that the team behind it had a lot of fun ideas they wanted to experiment with and put on display for every fan. There might be parts that are overall better than others, but it ends up as a solid experience with plenty of depth and heart baked into it. For all that we get out of it, I like having the idea of having the extra pieces of content to fill the time with. Hopefully they work on some of these things being mandatory to finish the game and get certain items, but we'll have to see about that in Reunion, or whatever the next game ends up being called. Let me know what you guys think about Rebirth and if you feel the same way as me on any of these points. Subscribe for more videos just like this one, and I'll see you all in the next video.